I've never told this to anyone outside of Velsen. Not my wife, not my closest friends. Nobody I've met since I left for university at 18, built a life, became the kind of adult who fixes things and solves problems and doesn't believe in things he can't explain. I'm telling it now because my son turned 12 last month. And something about watching him, the way he moves through the world so easily, so certain that everything has an answer, made me understand that I've been carrying this for 22 years, and I need to put it down somewhere before it gets any heavier. I grew up in Velsen, small farming town, 340 people, the kind of place where you know everyone, where summers last forever, where your parents' friends are, your friends' parents, and the whole town is one long conversation that started before you were born. I loved it there. I want to say that clearly. Whatever happened, I loved that town. But Velsen had Harvest Road. I can't tell you when I first became aware of it. There was no single moment. Growing up in Velsen, you absorbed it, the way you absorbed everything important. Not through explanation, but through the behavior of the adults around you. The way certain conversations stopped at certain points. The way my father, who was afraid of nothing in the practical world, was always home before midnight. The way the eastern edge of town had an energy to it in the evenings, a feeling of a boundary being respected. Harvest Road ran along that eastern edge. Cornfields on both sides, flat and straight for 2 kilometers, and during the day it was a working road. Tractors, trucks, farmhands. My father drove it himself sometimes in daylight. After midnight, nobody used it. Nobody went near it. Not teenagers, not adults, not anyone. I asked my father about it when I was 8 years old. He looked at me a long time before he answered. He said, "Some roads belong to us in the day and to something else at night. We leave it alone. It leaves us alone. That's the arrangement." I said, "What's something else?" He said my name. Just my name. And that was the end of the conversation. I was 28 years old before I asked him again. He told me then what he knew, what his father had told him, the fuller version. But that's his story to tell, not mine. My story is the night I was 12. Tobias had moved to Velsen from the city 2 years before. He was my best friend from his first week there. We sat next to each other in class and had the same way of finding everything slightly funnier than it was supposed to be, and that was enough at 12. He was a good person. I want to say that clearly too. He just didn't have it yet. The thing the rest of us had. That instinct. That quiet tightening in the chest when certain things came up. He'd been in Velsen 2 years and he'd heard the talk about Harvest Road, and he'd formed the opinion, the completely reasonable opinion for someone who hadn't grown up there, that it was local legend, small town mythology, something to give the place character. I couldn't explain why he was wrong. I didn't have the language at 12. I just had the feeling. And on a Friday night in October, that wasn't enough. We were supposed to be asleep. My parents had gone to bed at 10:30 and trusted us, which was their first mistake and entirely my fault. We lay in the dark talking, and eventually Tobias said he was hungry, and we crept down to the kitchen, like we'd gotten away with something, and made sandwiches and came back upstairs. It was almost midnight when Tobias said, "Let's ride." I should have said no. 22 years later, I still turn that moment over. The specific weight of it. The very simple no that was right there. Available. and that I chose not to say because I was 12, and Tobias was looking at me. And the question underneath the question was, "Are you scared?" I said, "Okay." We took my brother Lucas's bike from the yard. I remember thinking we'd be in trouble for that. And that thought seems almost funny to me now, thinking about the trouble we were actually about to find. And rode out into the empty street. I want to describe that night physically because the details matter and because I've not forgotten a single one of them in 22 years. Cold. That specific late October cold that makes everything sharp and precise. Full moon, almost bright enough to read by. The streets completely empty. Every house dark. The town felt like a stage set with everyone gone home. Tobias said, "Let's just look at the entrance. We don't go on it. We just ride to the chain and look and come back." I said, "Just the entrance." He said, "Obviously." I told myself that was reasonable. I told myself standing at the entrance to a road and looking down, it was not the same as going on it, that the rule was about using the road, not about seeing it. I was wrong about that. I think I knew I was wrong about that. But I pedaled toward the eastern edge of town anyway. I want to describe that night physically because the details matter and because I have not forgotten a single one of them in 22 years. Cold. That specific late October cold that makes everything sharp and precise. Full moon, almost bright enough to read by. The streets completely empty. Every house dark. The town felt like a stage set with everyone gone home. Tobias said, "Let's just look at the entrance. We don't go on it. We just ride to the chain and look and come back." I said, "Just the entrance." He said, "Obviously." I told myself that was reasonable. I told myself, standing at the entrance to a road and looking down, it was not the same as going on it, that the rule was about using the road, not about seeing it. I was wrong about that. I think I knew I was wrong about that. But I pedaled toward the eastern edge of town anyway. The entrance to Harvest Road is marked by 2 wooden posts and a rusted chain strung between them at hip height. No sign, no warning, just the chain and the road beyond it, stretching away into the dark, the corn on both sides standing tall and still. We stopped at the chain. I put my foot down. Nothing happened. The road was just a road, flat and gray in the moonlight, the corn motionless in the cold air. The whole thing completely ordinary and quiet. Tobias said, "See?" And I did see. I could feel my fear starting to seem childish, the product of superstition and small-town stories told by people who didn't know better. I was standing at Harvest Road at midnight and nothing was happening, and maybe my father's explanation was the only real truth. Some roads belong to us in the day and something else at night. And maybe something else just meant animals. Maybe it just meant the dark. I was about to say, "Okay, we've seen it. Let's go back." And then we heard it. I'm going to be precise about this sound because imprecision would be a kind of dishonesty. It came from the right side of the road, maybe 400 or 500 meters in. A movement in the corn. Not wind. There was no wind that night. This was directional, specific. Something moving through the stalks slowly, moving parallel to the road, moving toward us. We stood completely still. The sound continued, unhurried, patient. The corn displacing and resettling with each movement, steady as footsteps. I was calculating distance. Whatever it was getting closer. 300 meters now, maybe. Then it stopped. Silence. Then the corn on the left side of the road began to move. Same sound. Same patient, unhurried displacement. but now it was on the left. It had crossed the road. In the silence between the two sounds, in the seconds when the right side stopped and the left side started, nothing had crossed the road visibly. The road between the 2 points of sound was empty and gray and unbroken in the moonlight. Nothing had crossed it. But something was now on the other side. I turned the bike around. I didn't say anything to Tobias. I just turned it and pedaled, and he grabbed my shoulders, and we went back toward town as fast as I could push the pedals, and neither of us said a single word. Not one word. The whole ride home. We lay in the dark in my room for a long time. I remember the ceiling. I stared at it until my eyes adjusted, and I could see the faint texture of it, and I stared at that instead of thinking. After a while, Tobias said, very quietly, it was probably an animal. I didn't answer. He said, something living in the corn, a fox or something. I didn't answer. He said, Eric. I said, go to sleep. He said, do you think it followed us? The ceiling. I said, go to sleep, Tobias. He didn't say anything else. I don't know when he fell asleep. I didn't sleep at all. He went home after breakfast. My mother asked if he was all right, and he said yes, tired, and left without finishing his food. I spent that day in the yard with Beck, our dog. I sat on the steps, and Beck sat next to me, and we stayed there most of the afternoon, and I didn't read or listen to music or do anything except sit and think about the sound in the corn and the silence between the two sounds. That night, my parents in bed, the house quiet. I heard the back fence, a long, slow scraping along the boards, left to right, like something running itself along the wood. Even, unhurried, the exact same quality of movement as whatever had been in the corn. That sense of something that was not in a hurry because it didn't need to be, because time worked differently for it. Beck heard it too. He walked to the back door and stood there, and every hair on his back rose straight up. He stood rigid, facing the door. He didn't bark. Beck barked at everything. His entire life he barked at mail carriers and squirrels and cars that slowed down outside, and once at a plastic bag caught in the fence for 20 minutes. I had never in 4 years heard him encounter something and not bark. He didn't bark at this. He stood and shook faintly and made no sound. The scraping reached the end of the fence and stopped. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the counter. Nothing else that night. I didn't tell my parents for 4 days. I was 12, and I had broken the rule I'd been raised around, and telling them meant telling them that, and I couldn't make myself do it. So I sat with it for 4 days alone. Night 2, nothing. I lay listening until 3 a.m., and the house was quiet. Night 3, the gate, not opening, being tried. The latch lifting and the gate not opening because it was locked, and the latch settling back down and lifting again. 3 times, patient as anything. Then silence. I lay in my bed and stared at the ceiling. Beck sat in the corner of my room the whole night. He didn't sleep. I could hear him breathing in the dark. Night 4, I heard something on the roof. Weight, distributed and slow, moving from one end of the roof to the other. One long pass, then nothing. I remember pulling the blanket to my chin and looking at the ceiling differently than I had before. Not as a thing to stare at, but as the only thing between me and what was above it. I lay like that until morning. On the 5th day, I told my father. I sat across from him at the kitchen table after dinner, and I told him everything. The bike, the road, the chain, the sound in the corn, the silence between the sounds. All of it. He listened to the whole thing without moving. When I finished, he asked only one question. He said, "When you rode away, did you look back?" I thought about it carefully. The dark road behind us, Tobias's hands on my shoulders, the speed of the pedaling, the absolute wordlessness of that ride. He said, "I didn't look back." He looked at me for a long time, reading my face. Then he picked up the phone and called Tobias's father. I heard the conversation from the stairs, my father's voice low and controlled the way it got when he was managing something serious. I heard him say, "The road? Past midnight?" Both of them. A pause. Then, "Is he certain he didn't look back?" A longer pause. Then my father said something that I didn't understand at the time, but have thought about many times since. He said, "If neither of them looked back, then we have a chance. A chance. Not, it's fine. Not, nothing to worry about. A chance." He brought Gerhard to the house the next afternoon. Gerhard was 79. He lived in Velsen his whole life, and he was the person the adults went to when something happened that the adults didn't have language for. I'd always known that in the vague way children know things about the adult world. That afternoon, I understood exactly what it meant. I was sent to the yard. I sat on the back steps for an hour with Beck, and I listened to the sounds of the previous nights run on a loop in my head. The fence, the gate, the roof. My father came out and sat next to me. He said, "Gerhard says it ends. It tests the boundary, the house, the fence, the gate. And when it finds the rule is being kept now, even after being broken, it accepts the arrangement again and it moves on. A few more nights and it's done." I said, "And Tobias?" My father looked at the yard. He said, "Tobias needs to be certain he didn't look back." I said, "He says he didn't." My father nodded slowly. Then he said something I've never forgotten. He said, "Eric, looking back doesn't just mean turning your head. Sometimes it means going back to it in your mind, returning to it, wanting to understand it more than you're afraid of it." I didn't fully understand that then. I think about it differently now. 2 more nights. The gate on the first night, just once. On the second night, nothing until 2 a.m., and then a sound from the backyard that I had no name for. Not the fence, not the gate. Something that I can only describe as presence, a weight in the air, a density outside the back windows. The way a room feels different when someone has just left it. Beck sat in the corner of my room and didn't move. That second night lasted a very long time. Then morning came, and Beck ate his breakfast and went out to the yard, and nothing was different. And the night after that, nothing. The house was just a house again. Tobias's family left 3 weeks later. No warning, no goodbye. They packed in a single day and left in 2 cars. I saw them from the front window, their furniture strapped to a trailer, Tobias's mother carrying boxes with the mechanical efficiency of someone who needed to be somewhere else as fast as possible. Tobias was in the back seat. I raised my hand as the car went past. He didn't look up. I never heard from him again. I'm 34 now. I have a son who is 12 and moves through the world easily. And I watch him, and I love him, and I'm afraid for him in the way parents are afraid. Not of specific things, but of the general fact that the world contains things that don't announce themselves. I went back to Velsen last summer, drove through it with my wife, who grew up in a city and who I love and who I've told almost everything. I haven't told her this. As we drove through, she looked out the window and said, "It's lovely. I understand why you miss it." We drove past the eastern edge of town. I didn't slow down. I didn't look toward the road. I kept my eyes on the road in front of me. My wife said, "What's that road?" I said, "Just a farming road." She said, "It's pretty. All that corn." I said, "Yes." And I drove on. I think about Tobias sometimes and whether he looked back or whether the thing outside his second floor window just didn't stop the way it stopped for us. Whether the arrangement held for my family and not for his, for some reason I'll never be given. And I think about what my father said. Looking back doesn't just mean turning your head. Sometimes it means going back to it in your mind, returning to it, wanting to understand it more than you're afraid of it. I'm 34 years old, and I'm recording this story and putting it somewhere outside of myself. Maybe that's looking back. Maybe this is the thing my father warned me about. I've thought about that. I've decided I can live with it. I just hope it can live with me looking.